Africans will get more information about the fate of this year's local government elections. Voters are scheduled to go to the polls on the 27th of October. An inquiry into the viability of voting during a pandemic was held, and the report is set to be released this afternoon. Let's cross now to the DA's Siviwe Gwarube. Siviwe, thank you so much for joining us and for patiently waiting. We appreciate it. What are you hoping the outcome will be today?
Look, we've been quite vocal about the fact that we are of the view that one of the key cornerstones of any constitutional democracy is the regular, free and fair elections. And we think that it's quite important, particularly a local government election, where people have an opportunity to vote directly who they want their public representatives to be. So today what we're anticipating either the former Chief Justice will either say that, the IEC needs to either establish ways and means to make sure that people are able to register freely in light of the COVID-19 infections, or that he would advise the IEC to approach the Court for a postponement. And so what we will then be able to do once that report comes out is to examine whether or not, in light of what the Constitution requires, which is regular, free and fair elections, is the report in line with that? And so we're looking forward to studying the report as and when it comes out.
What's your biggest concern should a postponement be suggested?
Look, again, the Constitution makes it very clear how and when elections should be conducted. And our concern is that you cannot have a situation where you can simply waiver the demand for free and fair elections that is enshrined in the Constitution, unless then that constitutional provision is then changed. And that's why the work of the Constitutional Court in this regard will be quite important. And our worry here is that the reality is that, now it is COVID-19 infections. What prevents a government of the day from postponing regular elections in the future? We are of the view that it could potentially set a very dangerous precedent, something that is really enshrined in the Constitution and that is a huge proponent of our constitutional democracy cannot be taken lightly. And so that is why we've been dead set that it's important that South Africans go to the polls, if the IEC can guarantee that they can do so freely, fairly, and safely. If the IEC is of the view that they can pull this off, then we are fully behind them, and we would like the South African public to be able to choose their public representatives in the local government elections.
Siviwe, you speak on behalf of the party on health matters. The pandemic has wreaked havoc on all parts of society. How do you think, or how would you suggest that the IEC go ahead with the elections in the environment of the pandemic?
Absolutely. Look, again, the reality here is that we are hugely behind with what our vaccination targets should be. And government has been both subjected to preventable and unpreventable delays in this regard. And so it is a deep concern for us that we have not vaccinated nearly enough people. And so what really would need to happen is that the IEC would need to also consider government's record in terms of being able to vaccinate as many people as possible. And we need to look at how those timelines will fit into the timelines of the election. But of course, the IEC remains the custodian of rolling out elections. And so they've been able to demonstrate during the by-elections that we've had over the last couple of months that there are ways and means in which we'll be able to conduct elections at various voting stations, ensuring social distancing, ensuring that people there are protected. And the reality here is that we have also got to understand that a pandemic like this is going to be with us for a while, and we've got to be able to, as South Africa, get to a point where we are conducting the normal business of the day in and around the pandemic. And so that is why the capacity of the IEC becomes a very critical point here. And that's why then we need to be guided by what they are able to do and whether or not they're able to do what they've been able to pull off during the by-elections.
Siviwe, the IEC might say, okay, we can go ahead with the elections. We're able to hold them during this pandemic environment. But what does campaigning look like for political parties trying to operate during a raging pandemic?
Absolutely, and I think that's a very critical question, because I think that the political parties themselves have a huge responsibility, because the IEC's sort of mandate or obligations will begin and end where it comes to registration, how they will ensure that people are registered in registration weekend and on election day and days preceding that. However, political parties themselves have an obligation to keep South Africans safe, and that's why, again, as the official opposition in the country, we've said that it's absolutely important that political parties reimagine how they reach voters with their message, and then how they reimagine how it is that they're campaigning. The reality is that we cannot simply say, because political parties have not risen to the occasion of a changing environment, that it is on the basis of that we must postpone an election that is guaranteed by our constitution. The reality is that political parties themselves also need to be able to get up to speed with how do they reach South Africans with their message, how do they communicate with South Africans in a way that does not endanger them, and that is the work that should have been done and should have been happening between now and then. But what we cannot have is political parties being utterly irresponsible, like we saw with the EFF conducting or convening a huge, massive gathering, because that in effect puts people's lives in danger. And so there is a huge responsibility on political parties, and in our submission to the IEC, we've pledged our support to say we will be part of the process of figuring out how it is, as political parties, we can assist the IEC in terms of conducting a free and fair election.
Siviwe, thank you so much for joining us. The DA's Siviwe Gwarube joining us, and we will find out the fate of the local government elections later today.